Hello, as a prelude to this album review, I'd like to just share a couple of happy moments from the year 1981, the same year as Stop and Smell the Roses came out, which was from April in 81 when Ringo got married to Barbara Bach. And this was the Daily Star front page. Here come the Beatles. You can see Paul and George there coming out of the Marylebone Registry Office, which is the same place where Paul himself had got married 12 years earlier. And then this, after the death of Lennon, this was so nice to see. It's the best thing, barring a reunion of the four of them, it was the best thing, next best thing. And the Daily Express quite rightly called this picture the reunion. And they didn't get together to record an album, but they got together because they were close friends. And this picture for me is incredibly moving. Got George and Olivia, Ringo and Barbara, Paul and Linda, and James is about 3.5, I think, here. And Barbara's son from a previous marriage. And then you've got Bobby Sands dying of the hunger strike. So to put it in context, 1981. So with that, we move to the review of the album, and this will take you a little bit back in time. Hello, it's John Heaton. Another video from the Bahamas, and the reason I'm doing another Ringo review is because Ringo recorded 3 of the tracks from this album here in Nassau at the Compass Point Studios down the road. We tried to record this video at Compass Point the other day, but it was really too windy, and so we decided to re-record it down here on the beach. And a bit of a background to this album: it was released in 1981, but originally conceived of in 1980 as a collaboration between Ringo and his 3 Beatle mates. And the first Beatle to record with Ringo was Paul in the south of France, who did a few tracks, including 3 included on this album, and also a track called You Can't Fight Lightning, which was going to have been the title track of this album, but was probably rightly dropped because it's not a brilliant song. But the album actually opens with Private Property, which is a pretty strong Paul McCartney track, and Lawrence Juba, the Wings guitarist, is featured as well. And I believe when Paul was down in France with Ringo, he spoke on the telephone with John Lennon, who was busily recording Double Fantasy. So this album ended up being with contributions from George and Paul. George did some sessions at Friar Park in the fall of 1980, I think, and did the next song, Rack My Brain, which is a song he'd had lying around for years, and decided it was more to Ringo's style, so gave it to Ringo, and contributes a very tasty guitar solo. Got the words here. And then John met up with Ringo in New York City, November 1980, at his hotel, and at Ringo's hotel. And John and Yoko and Ringo and Barbara apparently had a fine old time reminiscing, and John handed in 2 tracks, one of which was Nobody Told Me, which later turned up on Milk and Honey, and another track called Life Begins at 40, which Ringo would not record because within 3 or so weeks of that meeting, John was tragically murdered, as we know. So this album ended up with no contribution from John, but with some solid contributions from Paul and George. So the next track is Drumming Is My Madness, which is one of the tracks recorded here in the Bahamas, and it's a fun track. I think it's written by Harry Nilsson, yes it is, and it's just an ode to Ringo's instrument of choice, the drums. It's fun. The solo in the middle is a bit lackluster, but we'll forgive them that. It's fun lyrics, nice musicianship, nice flutes, nice arrangement, and I like it. Attention is the second track from Paul, and this was going to open the album when it was going to be called You Can't Fight Lightning. I think that would have been a mistake. It's an okay track, it's relatively catchy, with some nice backing vocals from Paul and Linda, but it's not my favourite on the album really. Unlike the next track, the title track, Stop and Smell the Roses, which is another track recorded here in the Bahamas, down at Compass Point. And the first vocal for this was recorded on December the 4th, 1980. And indeed, Ringo was here in the Bahamas when he heard of John's death, so he flew straight from Nassau to New York to try and comfort Yoko and Sean. And I don't know if he's come back since. I'm keeping an eye open for him, just in case, but I don't think he's come back after recording this album and Bad Boy, parts of this album and Bad Boy here in the Bahamas. So Stop and Smell the Roses is a fine track. Just check who wrote it. Yeah, Harry Nilsson and Richard Starkey, joint contribution. And there's a hilarious video of this track on YouTube, you want to check it out. So that closes side one very strongly. Side two opens with Ron Wood's contribution, Dead Giveaway, which is okay. Bit of a strange choice to open the side, perhaps, but it's not a bad track. And then the second track is George's next contribution, a cover song, You Belong to Me, where George is playing some nice slide guitar. And then the next track is probably my favourite on the whole album, a cover of Carl Perkins' Sure to Fall in Love with You, which the Beatles had actually done for the BBC sessions in around '63. And I think this version is probably a little better. I think it really suits Ringo's vocal range, and Paul and Linda are on hand to provide very nice backing vocals. And Paul's bass is nice and melodic as usual, and it's a nice arrangement. They slow down the tempo, brings out the melody more. I think they do a really nice job. This is one of the tracks recorded in the south of France. And then the next track is Nice Way, which is Stephen Stills' contribution, which is okay. Not great, not terrible. And then the album finishes with Back Off Boogaloo, where Ringo is trying to revisit his famous 1972 hit. And I have to say, it's a bit of a disaster. I don't know why he does this. He's done this numerous times over the years, tried to revisit one of his tracks. He did it with Love Me Do on Vertical Man, which didn't work, terrible. And he's done it with Step Lightly and Wings, a couple of his solo tracks. And I don't really see the point in revisiting these songs. To me, the original is more or less always preferable. And in the case of Back Off Boogaloo, he really does his best to butcher the song, because Harry Nilsson's, and it was recorded here in the Bahamas, but that didn't save it, because Harry Nilsson's desperately trying to get all these Beatles references into the song, a bit like he did on his first solo album, which so impressed John and Paul. But it doesn't work here, in my opinion. It's a very weak end to the album. I tend to skip this track if I play the album. But this album, I'm not going to bother to give it a mark out of 10, but for Ringo fans, it's got moments worthy of investigation. The title track and Sure to Fall are top-notch Ringo, and Private Property and Rack My Brain are pretty much up there as well. And Drumming Is My Madness is a nice track. So at least half of this is decent. Thank you for watching. See you next time.